Hey guys, we're ready to start getting into chapter 1 a little bit more. So we're going to do lesson 1-2 and we're going to talk about ratios today. So ratios. And we're going to go through definition and then we're going to kind of show you how to write it. There's a couple different ways and how to interpret. And we'll do a couple practice problems. So let's get started. Let's start with a definition. So what do I mean by ratio? And a ratio is a comparison so when we hear this word, we need to think about division. It's a comparison of two quantities. Oops, that's a terrible cue. And they must have the same label. If they aren't the same label, then it's not a ratio. It would be a rate, and we'll talk about that in our next set of notes. And again, using, and I'll reiterate it, division. Okay, so two values that have the same label using, or two numbers using the same label using division. So this sounds strangely like something we just finished talking about, so also known as, aka, a fraction. Okay, so let's talk about ways to write ratios. Having trouble writing today. Ways to write ratios. Okay, so I'm going to draw a picture, and my picture is going to contain two different shapes. So we're going to have some ovals, or circles. Yeah, we'll call them ovals. Well, no, let's draw that better. How about that? Let's make them ovals, actual ovals. And then let's have some X's. Okay, and we're usually going to be given a task. So for example, we want to compare ovals to X's. Okay, so I look at my ovals and I want you to pay attention to the order they're written is the order they take in the ratio. Okay, so we can write our ratios using words. So our ovals are 3, 2, the word 2, and then our X's is 4. So 3 to 4. So this is words. Okay. We can actually do the comparison, the ratio, with a colon. So we use the colon as the dot over the dot. And we would say we have 3 ovals to 4 X's. So that would be the colon. Or we can write it vertically using the fraction bar to do the comparison. So 3 to 4. So all of them get read the same way, 3 to 4. Okay. Now, if you have a ratio and you notice that there's a factor that's in common. Because a ratio is a fancy way of saying a fraction, you need to make sure that it's always reduced to lowest terms. So always reduce fractions / ratios. Okay, so that is what I have room for on this. Now this should, I'm going to keep writing, but that's going to be on the new screen, but for you guys it still should be the same page. Okay, so let's go to the next one, and we're going to talk about ways to compare ratios. Oops, ratios. Ooh, that took a little while to happen. Okay, so we're going to start off with some circles. Let's do 2 of them. Let's add some triangles. Let's put 3 of them. And then let's have some rectangles. And let's put 4 of those. Okay, now there's 2 ways in general that we can do comparisons, and I'm going to only show you some of them. Okay, so one would be part to part. Okay, so part to part, it would be saying something like, hey, can you show me triangles compared to squares? So what's the ratio of triangles to squares? So that's part to part, because the triangles are part of all the figures that are there. Squares, well, they're rectangles. Oh well, doesn't matter. Let's change the word. We'll just change it to rectangles. To rectangles. They kind of, the third one look kind of squarish. So let's see. We've got 3 ways to do it. But again, what I like to do is we can draw a picture of it. So we have triangles, and I'm just going to color in all the ones that I see compared to the rectangles. Okay, and if I wrote it in numbers, it would be 3 to 4. Now, those numbers are 1 apart, so that means that they can't be reduced. So that would be as far as I could go. So in addition to writing it as a fraction, remember my other options would be 3 and then the word 2. That's our comparing word. 4. So the order of the words that they want us to compare is the, there's another one there, is the order that we write them. Keep that in mind. And then we can do the colon. Okay. Now, I'm going to give you a frame of how I would interpret this. Okay, how I would interpret this. I would say, and this is kind of my frame, and it's going to get kind of color coded. And I would say for every, and then here's where I start putting in some numbers and words, 3 triangles, there are 4 rectangles. okay? And that's how we can, anytime I'm comparing a part to a part, I'm going to use this kind of frame, all right? Now, let's do another one of those. Let's do circles to square rectangles. So we have two circles, and we're going to compare it to 4 rectangles. Okay, so then I would say that I have 2 circles compared to 4 rectangles. And remember what we had talked about? That we need to reduce even our ratios. So I notice that I can divide a 2 out of each of them. And once I reduce it, then I can interpret it. Now, you're going to see I like to use fractions as how I show a ratio. So this one, we're going to say for every 1 circle, because I'm looking at the reduced version, there are 2 rectangles. Okay, so that's called part to part, where I'm looking at a piece of what I have compared to a different piece. Now let's change it up, and we're going to talk part to whole. So this part to whole would be something like triangles to all shapes. That's what whole means, everything that's there. Okay, so I'm not going to draw a picture of that because that would be pretty big. But I do know that the triangles, that there are 3 of them. So remember, he's going to go on top because that's what was listed first. And then we're going to count up the shapes. So altogether is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we have 9 shapes altogether. Now I'm going to give this a unique color because, let's make it a dark one. Because there's not, I've got orange, red, and blue, and purple, which would actually be all purple, right? Red and blue together make purple, but don't worry about it. So again, this is, the denominator is the sum of all shapes. Okay, now again, we've got an issue that this is not reduced to lowest term, so we are going to reduce. They have a 3 in common. And that's going to equal 1 triangle for every 3 shapes. Okay, and again, in addition to writing it that way, I could do it with the colon, or with the word 2. Let's do that first. And I could do it with the colon. Okay, now when I have to interpret this, I'm going to say things a little bit different. Before, I put how many of the item and its label. Okay, I use for every 1 circle, there are 2 rectangles. For every 3 triangles, there are 4 rectangles. But this guy, I have to word it differently. So when I'm doing part to whole, this is what I'm going to write. The first number is the number of triangles. So we've got 1, and then here's where it changes. Out of every, and then we have to write the second number, 3, and give it its label, shapes, is, and then we're going to describe what that 1 represents, a triangle. So this would be how I would interpret my ratio. 1 out of every 3 shapes is a triangle. Now that only works when it's part to whole, okay? All right, so I'm going to go to my next screen and I'm going to pause for a moment. I'm going to write a word problem and then I'm going to unpause. And so I suggest that you pause it as well, copy it down, and then come back. Okay, so basically we're going to do these 3 problems. The first one, it says write a ratio in simplest form that compares the number of suns to the number of moons, then explain its meaning. I got to draw the drawing. I'll do that in a minute. A pet store sold the animals listed in the table in 1 week. Write the ratio of cats to pets sold that week, then explain its meaning. And then Katie wants to divide her 30 flowers into 2 groups so that the ratio is 2 to 3. How many flowers are in each group? So my suggestion is that you go ahead and pause and then copy down the problems, but you got to leave yourself space underneath. We're going to do each of these problems. They're slightly different kinds of problems. Some are part to whole, some are part to part, and then we've got an interesting one on the last one. Okay, so when you're ready, come back and join me. All right. Good to have you back. Let's go ahead and I'm going to draw my moon and suns. So let's do some little pink moons. We're going to add some blue suns because suns are blue, right? Ha ha ha. Kind of looks like a kindergartner's drawing these, huh? I was a kindergartner once. Okay. So they're talking about the pink moons and they're talking about the blue suns. So here's the thing I need you to pay attention to. Notice what they mention first. Oops, I do different color there. They talk about the moons first. Then, or the suns first. Oh my goodness, my brain. Then they talk about the moons. So the order that they mention things is the order that we write. So since they're talking about the portion that are suns versus the portion that are moons, this is what we call a part to part. So part of all the numbers compared to the other part of the numbers. So for us, it's going to be the suns. So I'll just label, he's a sun, he's a moon. And we did suns first. So we're going to put the suns number first. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 suns compared to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 moons. Now remember, it did say in simplest form. By the way, it doesn't have to remind you to put it in simplest form. They're both even, so I'm going to divide out at 2. And that takes us down to 2 compared to 3. So remember, this is the one that starts, when it says for explain, it starts with the for every. For every, and then we go with the top number, and it's labeled 2 suns. There are 3 moons. So that's how we would interpret or explain the meaning of the ratio. Okay? All right, let's go to the next one. A pet store sold the animals listed in the table in 1 week. Write the ratio of cats. So that's the first thing mentioned. To pets. That's the second thing mentioned. Sold that week. Then explain its meaning. So I'm comparing one section of the animals to all the animals. So this is going to be what we would call a part to whole. Part to whole. So cats are going to be the first number, and we have 8 cats. And we're going to compare those 8 cats to all the animals. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add up all the animals. So let's see, I got 0 and 4 is 4, 4 and 8 is 12. And then I have 2, 3. So I have 32. So I have 8, and I'm going to compare it to 32. But again, what I need to remember is to simplify. And 8 goes into both of those numbers. So I'm going to divide the 8 out. That's the greatest common factor, going back to yesterday's lesson. And then we have 1, and then it is going to compare to 4. So because it's part to whole, we write this one differently. So we're going to start with the top 1, and then we use that frame out of every. And then we're going to talk about the second guy, 4, and then pets. We're going to use exact words we see. And then we're going to mention R, and then what goes with 1? Cats. 1 out of every 4 pets, or we could say, let's do this. 1 out of every 4 pets sold is, and then we'll say a cat. That makes more sense. Okay? So that's how we talk about the ratio when it's part to whole. 1 out of every, whatever the denominator is. All right, this last one is the weird one. So Katie wants to divide her 30 flowers into 2 groups so that the ratio is 2 to 3. And then it says how many flowers are in each group. So somehow we've got to split those numbers in such a way that when I simplify the ratio, I get 2 to 3. So here's the trick on how to do this. We're going to look at the ratio, okay? And that tells us we have 2 different types of flowers, okay? So we have 2 in one, we have 3 in the other. So that means we're going to have 5 groups of flowers. Now the question doesn't ask how many groups are there. It says how many flowers are in each group. So I'm going to draw a box of groups. Okay, so that's your 2 versus your 3. So it's kind of like we're comparing 2 to 3. Okay, so I had 30 flowers. And I'm going to split it into a total of 5 groups. 2 plus 3 is 5. And I get 6. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that number in each of the boxes. So I split 30 into 5 equal groups. But when I was putting the flowers into 2 groups, I put it into 2 groups together, and 3 groups in the next. Okay, so this is how we're going to interpret this. So if I add 6 plus 6, that gives me 12. And if I add 6 plus 6 plus 6, that gives me 18. Okay, so again, we had 30 flowers split equally into 5 groups. I went to the ratio, and the ratio told me how many groups. All right? So, and we figured out that there were 6 flowers in each group. Okay? So now, when I look at my 2 answers, I would say there were 12 flowers in one group and 18 flowers in the other group. Or I could say in the second group. Okay, now I know that's kind of the tough one, and we'll talk more about this in class. All right, good luck, guys. Bye now.